So Dr. Gregory Marouard has been a research associate in Egyptian archaeology at the Oriental Institute at the University of Chicago since 2010. He received his PhD in art history and archaeology in 2010 from the University of Poitiers in France. And his dissertation topic was on archaeology, architecture, and imagery of urban houses outside the city proper during the Hellenistic and Roman periods. So as you can tell from that title, he comes into Egyptian archaeology with a classical archaeology background. And he now specializes in urban, domestic, and harbor archaeology. Since the first season at Wadi al-Jarf in 2011, Gregory's been the senior archaeologist in charge of the excavations of the harbor of Khufu. This is a French institute, the IFAO, a CNRS, and Paris-Sorbonne project directed by Professor Pierre Tallet. And some of you may have caught his lecture just a few weeks ago, 2 Sundays ago, as a matter of fact, at the Museum of Fine Arts. In June 2016, this project was awarded the prestigious Cino del Duca Prize for Archaeology by the French Academy. That's the biggest and most important prize you can get. But this list of sites doesn't end there by a long shot. Since 2006, Dr. Marouard has been the senior archaeologist, and then since 2010, co-director with Nadine Muller of the Tel Edfu project out of the Oriental Institute, again, University of Chicago. From 2010 to 2013, he was director of the South Edfu Pyramid Project, which focuses on the survey and rescue protection program of the last unexplored provincial pyramid, spanning dynasties 3 to 4. Since 2013, he's been director of the Oriental Institute's mission to Dendera and co-director of another joint project at Dendera with Pierre Zignani of the IFAO CNRS and Jan Tristant of Macquarie University in Australia. It goes on. Since 2015, he's been consulting on archaeological projects and questions for Chicago House, that's the epigraphic survey of the University of Chicago in Luxor, and supervising some of the operations at Medinat Habu, Ramses III's mortuary complex, in particular the house of the famous Butek Amen and the Western High Gate. And also since 2015, he's director of the Kom el Dahab Survey, another Oriental Institute, Egypt Exploration Society, Delta Survey. This is a large Hellenistic and Roman settlement and harbor installation located in the eastern Egyptian delta, the Lake Manzala region. Is that not enough sites for you? For about 18 years now, he's worked at the following sites in Egypt: Buto, Karanis, Ain Sukhna, Wadi Araba, Abu Rawash, South Abydos, Karnak Temple, Deir el-Medina, Bawit Tebtunis, and Old Islamic Cairo. He's the author of numerous articles in the standard French, German, and Austrian Egyptological journals, and he's contributed to several collective anthologies. And he's now preparing the final excavation reports for a number of these sites. How he fits it all in and merges it all together without going nuts is beyond me. But tonight we had to pick just one of these sites, and so we've asked him to bring us up to date on the Red Sea coast with new discoveries at Wadi al-Jarf. Dr. Gregory Marouard.
Oh, thank you so much, Peter, for this really nice introduction. And thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. And thank you for people on Facebook following us tonight. So that's my pleasure to present this discoveries at the Wadi Jarf. As Peter mentioned, this is not an Oriental Institute project. This is a French project from the French Institute and the Paris University Sorbonne. And this is directed by my colleague Pierre Tallet, who is the chair of Egyptology department there. And I'm conducting the excavation with him. So is the Egyptologist and probably more able than me to make you a more deep description of the papyrus that we discovered at the site in 2013, which make the site actually famous. So tonight I will focus first on the excavation of this site and the various projects that conduct to this excavation. And after I will show you just main documents, just to give you an idea about what those papyri talk about. So the topic tonight is quite exotic. We will not discuss about any tombs or temple that you found in Upper Egypt, or we'll talk about pyramids at some point, for sure. But for tonight, the main focus will be here, this area of the Gulf of Suez. Wadi al-Jarf is located here, and just for people not really familiar with the local geography, we have the Nile Valley right here of Egypt, Sinai Peninsula here, Israel, Jordan, and the Red Sea. So this research on the Egyptian harbor is a quite recent research topic. We basically start the excavation on most of these sites around the year 2000, 2002. Those harbors are linked to the phenomenon of the royal expedition that were carried out in two directions, the southern peninsula, the southern Sinai Peninsula, and the distant land of Punt. Those expeditions went to Sinai in order to collect mostly copper and turquoise, and they went to Punt in order to collect incense and other exotic products from the Horn of Africa. Something very important, each one of these expeditions had a navigation section component at some point. So this, you will see, is really important because we are not dealing only with expedition through the desert, we're dealing also with team of navigators, people that cross the Red Sea on boats. And about 15 years ago, 20 years ago, many scholars still consider that the Egyptians were really, really poor sailors. And this is absolutely not the case. So several projects focus on this question of the expedition and the harbor installation on the Red Sea. So I will just show you very quickly the two main sites, harbor sites that we knew before the Wadi al-Jarf. The first one is actually located here on the Red Sea. Let me check. Mersagawasis on the Red Sea. And this is an American-Italian excavation, a local American excavation because it's a University of Boston project. And this team worked mostly between 2001 and 2015 on this harbor site, which dates back from the Middle Kingdom, only the Middle Kingdom. And the main destination for the expedition that stopped at the site of Mersagawasis was the land of Punt, as you can see here on this memorial. So this site gives us, since its discovery in 1976, a really, really important information. And as you can see here on this memorial of Vizion Tefoker, in the lower part I put the description. Basically, the ancient Egyptians used boats on the Red Sea, but those boats were built in the Nile Valley, probably in Coptos. Dismantled, they crossed the desert with the dismantled boats, and they rebuilt the boats on the seashore. Then after, they crossed the Red Sea to their destination. So a very important detail. And when the Italian-Americans started to excavate Mersagawasis, they found several galleries, like those, and a lot of nautical equipment, like ropes, anchors, pieces of boats. They also found several official reports. There are stela, mostly, that was originally included in those small niches. And they found multiple steles for most of the rulers of the 12th dynasty. So we are at the Middle Kingdom at that point. They also found several evidence of this journey to the land of Punt. For example, these pottery sherds, but they also found piece of obsidian. And we know that from various analyses that more than 96% of all the obsidian used in Egypt was originally from Ethiopia area. So the second site, the second harbor site, came a little bit later in the landscape. It was discovered in I will show you here. It was discovered in 1998 by Mahmoud Abdelkhazik, thanks to several inscriptions. And this site is much bigger than Mersagawasis, and it was used for a much longer time. So far, we think that the harbor site at Ain Sokhna probably starts in the middle of the Fourth Dynasty and was almost in a continuous use until the end of the Middle Kingdom, with a short occupation also during the New Kingdom. So about a millennia of occupation on this site. So just to show you that's a very strategic emplacement, very strategic way station on the way to the Wadi Marara and the Serabit El Khadim area, which is southern Sinai, and the main source for copper and turquoise. So the location was extremely strategic on the way from Memphis. There they found a huge well, a lot of water, local environment, game probably for hunting. And from Ain Sokhna, they crossed the Gulf of Suez by boat from here to Al Marka. We'll go back on this site a little bit later. And it's very possible that those expeditions not only goes by sea, but also turn around the end of the Gulf of Suez. So we think that those expeditions were multiple, a part by boat, a part by land. So as I mentioned before, the site was discovered in 1998, thanks to those official inscription here on the rock above the galleries. That belongs mostly to the first rulers of the 12th dynasty, late 11th dynasty, early 12th dynasty. So for several years, we considered that this harbor at Ain Sokhna was something similar to Mersagawasis, mostly Middle Kingdom occupation. Then, after several years, we found more and more evidence for an Old Kingdom occupation at the site. So you can see here that we have at least 6 galleries on this plan, but we had a total of 10 galleries on the site. So 4 galleries at Mersagawasis, 10 at Ain Sokhna. And those galleries have been cut into the rock probably in the middle of the Fourth Dynasty. We have several elements like those inscriptions here, official reports, list of crew members, and they were carved or inscribed here at the entrance. We had here in Gallery G5 a lot of big pottery containers that were used for storing water and food for the expedition. So all these shapes of pottery are very typical for the middle of the second part of the Fourth Dynasty. And we also found multiple clay ceilings. This one is the oldest one and belongs to Khafra, so the fourth king of the Fourth Dynasty, and probably the first Old Kingdom ruler really active at the site. We also found several other clay ceilings that belongs to most of the rulers of the Fifth Dynasty, and those clay ceilings were used, in fact, to close box, bags, baskets that actually preserve some food or goods sent from the Nile Valley to the site. So they are really precious documents for us because they are short-life artifacts, and generally they can give us a good idea of the context and the chronology of the context we are in. We also found two other inscriptions at the entrance of one of the galleries. This one from King Djedkare Izezi, which is the penultimate ruler of the Fifth Dynasty. This inscription is quite interesting because we have here a mention of the boat that they used, which is a cabinet, a boat probably in biblos style. And we know that this kind of boat was only used, and particularly during the Old Kingdom, in order to reach the land of Punt. So this is not enough. We found a couple of evidence, but we start to think, since several years now, that Ain Sokhna was probably the departure to expedition to the Sinai and also to Punt during the Fifth Dynasty. This second inscription, also of Djedka is quite interesting because we have one more time mentions of people involved into navigation, like the mention of an admiral here. But we have also a very interesting detail here. The director of the troop, said Etep, mentioned on this inscription, is also known on the other side of the Gulf of Suez, in Sinai, in Wadi Marara area, by another inscription from exactly the same period. So we have probably here the same guy on both sides of the Red Sea, the Gulf of Suez. So it's actually proving that they stop by Ain Sokhna and goes to the Wadi Marara. Another interesting detail, this is the only Old Kingdom inscription so far I know with a mention of the number of people involved in the expedition, 1,400 men. Last thing about Ain Sokhna. So we had 10 galleries. In 2 of them, we found, for the Middle Kingdom, a dismantled piece of boat. So if you remember the inscription from Coptos, the boats were built in the Nile Valley, dismantled, transported through the desert, and rebuilt on the Red Sea shore. But at the end of the expedition, it's very possible that they dismantle the boats and store them directly on site in those galleries. So like that, they can reuse the piece of boats for the next expedition. So this is something we know from Marsegawasis, something we know from Ain Sokhna, and you will see that in the case of the Wadi Jarf, it's exactly the same thing. So I will not discuss too much about Ain Sokhna. We already published 3 monographs. One more is actually in press. In 2009, we made a first colloquium. We organized a first colloquium with our colleagues at Marsegawasis about the Red Sea in pharaonic times. And it was the occasion to just put together the characteristics of those Egyptian harbors. So as you've seen for the 2 sides, we have all the time a complex of storage galleries. We have camps. All around, huge quantity of big pottery containers. And for the Old Kingdom, or mostly for the Middle Kingdom, those containers are very peculiar. This is not something that you found most of the time in the Nile Valley. It looks like that these containers were definitely dedicated to the expedition in order to store the food or the water. We have also on those sites a huge number of nautical equipment, traces of the products brought back from the area visited, and like the ceilings that I show you, we have multiple administrative materials and official expedition reports. So that's the elements that we knew about, that we knew for describing an harbor, an Egyptian harbor, before starting our work at the Wadi Jarf. So the Wadi Jarf came after that. We started the excavation in 2011. And this site is, in fact, much bigger and older than the 2 other examples. And this is probably the first Egyptian harbor. This is the most complete one. And this is probably the prototype. And in in opposition with and Sokhna, for example, the use of this harbor is really short. It was probably used only during the reign of King Khufu. It's possible that his predecessor, Snofru, was at the origin of the implantation, but so far we have absolutely no evidence for that. So we are located on the west bank of the Gulf of Suez, here, 25 kilometers south of Zafarana, and really close to those very famous monasteries in Egypt. If some of you have been in Egypt before, they are some really important place. But we are also located here at the mouth of the Wadi Araba, which is a huge wadi, more than 40 kilometers wide, that makes a direct link between the Nile Valley and the Red Sea. So, as Peter mentioned that in the introduction, a colleague of mine, Yann Tristan, and myself, we surveyed this area between 2008 and 2015. So we started the survey before starting to work on the Wadi Jarf, and we found here on the north of this Wadi Araba a quite long pharaonic trail that actually lead to several copper mines. And we were able to date this occupation from the middle of the third, maybe the end of the Third Dynasty. So it means before the early Fourth Dynasty, Egyptians already knew this area and conducted expedition in that direction. So they knew that they can connect the Nile Valley to the Red Sea through this area. And in 2015, we made a clear connection between the Wadi Jarf site and the Wadi Araba, and we found this huge trail. So I don't know if it's quite visible here on the screen, but you can see here these two parallel lines. They are the limits of a huge trail more than 8 meters wide, and we were able to follow this trail on 25 kilometers on the ground, but with the satellite images, we have almost the entire portion of this trail. And all along, we found multiple evidence for Fourth Dynasty pottery, and we found also numerous potsherds actually produced at the Wadi Jarf. I will show you the local production later. So this is probably one of the oldest highway in the world, very large road. And if you remember, they have to cross the desert with dismantled piece of boats. So they need probably this kind of trail to transport the wooden pieces. So that's a view from the side. So when you finish to cross the Wadi Araba, you arrive at the Wadi Jarf, and this is the view you have. On the other side, this big mountain named the Amman Pharaoh is actually in Sinai, and the Strait of Sea in this area is about 50 kilometers. So after about 100 miles through the desert, we stop at the Wadi Jarf, rebuild the boats, cross in straight line, and they probably reach this fortress, which was redated recently from the early Fourth Dynasty, because you can find at that site more than 86% of the pottery produced at the Wadi Jarf. So the Al-Marka fortress is probably a part of the Wadi Jarf complex, the head of the bridge, the sort of defensive installation that the Egyptians used on the other side of the Red Sea in order to protect the arrival of the team, the expedition, the goods, and also the product that they brought back to the Nile Valley. So after the Al-Marka fortress, it's very short. You have only 32 kilometers, just one day probably, to reach the Wadi Marouard. And the Wadi Marouard is quite famous since the end of the 19th century, because we found multiple official reports in this area and two quite interesting for us, one for Snofru, King Snofru, and one for King Khufu right here. So you can see Ormejedu, Khufu, and Renem Ruefui, the three names of Khufu that you will see one more time when we'll go into details for the Wadi Jarf. So, as usual, we are not really the first on the site. There is always someone that passed by. And in our case, this is Sir John Gardner Wilkinson, who is the father of the British Egyptology. And so in March 1823, he passed by a site on the Red Sea, just after stopping at the San Antonio Monastery. And he just gave us this description that nobody really connect until we discovered the site. And he mentioned here the ruins of an ancient town. Near the ruins is a small knoll containing 18 excavated chambers. And he looked for inscription, but the only thing that he found is only big fragments of vase, bitumen, charcoals, and cloth. And he concluded that these galleries were in fact catacombs and probably used by Greek and Romans because the Greek and Romans burned the dead, so it cannot be an Egyptian site. And the story was over, and the site was lost for about a century. When we started the excavation in 2011, the very first thing we found on the top of the whole kingdom remains are actually evidence of the passage of Sir Gardner Wilkinson at the site. So because from this description, we were not absolutely 100% sure that it described the Wadi Jarf, but we found several fireplaces. Let me go back. We found several fireplaces here. We know that one of the gallery here, J3, was excavated a long time ago, and we found a couple of things, porcelain from teacup porcelain from Manchester. We found a little cork with written ink on it. We found those Ottoman pipes, and we knew that Wilkinson liked to live like a Turkish, like a Mamluk. But we found also this endnote, and this is actually a description written by Wilkinson because we have many notes about Wilkinson during this trip. For example, the Tel Marna description. And we were able to prove that he probably wrote this note himself. And this is a description that he probably sent to his friend Burton. Actually, he was in the Wadi Araba. And that's a description for reaching the site at Wadi Jarf from the San Antonio Monastery. But he just left the note next to the fireplace. He left, and that's it. So it was extremely, emotional for us to find the traces of the first person to really discover the site. There is also these two guys. They were pilots for the Suez Canal Company in the mid-50s, and they were archaeologist amateurs. And during the weekend, generally, they took their jeep and they go south of Suez, and they found the site. They spent regularly the weekend there. They were able to draw some plans, take pictures of these big storage jars that we'll see later. They try to bring archaeologists to the site, and they send multiple letters to the French Institute, but no one really cared. And in 1956, the Suez crisis arrived. We went back to France, and the site was lost for another 50 years until we rediscovered it, thanks to satellite images in 2008. But it took us 3 years to start the excavation, a long process. And we made our first season in June 2011 during the Egyptian Revolution. We were probably one of the only excavation or new excavation projects starting in a new Egypt. So this satellite image is actually showing you that the site is multipolar, and it's stretched from the seashore to the mountains on more than 5 kilometers. So I will start with the harbor facilities on the seashore. So we found underwater remains. We have here quite an impressive pier, more than 150 meters in length from west to east, plus 40 meters on the beach here. And this pier is turning, it's an L shape, and it's turning to the south for another 120 meters. So in 2011, we were quite lucky. We had an astral luck because we had a full moon eclipse. And it created a very extremely low tide. So it was possible for us to record almost everything just with 2 feet of water. Generally, there is much more water than that. So we were able to make a plane like that, just carrying the total station reflector, and we map the pier. And at that point, we noticed that inside of the harbor, there is multiple anchors still in situ, and multiple storage jars. So this is a kite view, and you can see here the concentration of anchors. We have more than 21. We have 25, actually, anchors underwater. In 2015, we were able to excavate the part of the pier actually on the beach. So we have a geomorphologist with us. He's actually studying the evolution of the shore. And we think that the level of the Red Sea was slightly different during the whole kingdom and the Fourth Dynasty, maybe a little bit higher. And when you just look at the pier here in this area, you can see a demolition which is probably marking the level of the sea, and the waves and the rip currents probably destroyed the pier at this level. Now the Red Sea is much lower. So next to this pier, we found several dwellings and storage facilities, 2 buildings. And in between the 2 buildings, here we found more than 100 anchors in situ. They were stored in this space, probably at the final closure, the very last occupation, very last closure of the site. And you can notice that the anchors were put in circle. It's very sensible here, also here. And all the time, when they are in circle like that, it's because they were stored around probably a post. We have only the imprint. We have just the post all today. But when they store the anchors, the ceiling, the light roof of this building was probably still in situ. So we have many anchors. Before the Wadi al-Jarf excavation, probably we knew something like 35 anchors for entire Egypt, most of them from Mersagawasis. So we got something like 135 just in one campaign. So it took us a lot of time to study those elements. So they are really well preserved. You can see on this one the residue of ropes. And regularly, we have also red marks that probably correspond to the name of the boat or the name of team of navigators involved with these anchors and with the boat. It's difficult. There is only 2 signs, and we have no comparison so far. Only 1 anchor in Ain Sokhna has been discovered with inscription. In the case of Wadi al-Jarf, it's almost all of them have been inscribed with 4 to 5 different names. So that's a guide view of those installations next to the pier. We excavated the floor, and we were quite lucky because on the top of the floor and inside the floor, we found more than 100 of these clay ceiling fragments. The same kind of clay ceilings that I showed you in Ensorna a little bit before. So you can see the scale of these elements. It's really small, but for us, it's giving tons of information. And all of these clay ceilings are actually mentioning the name of Khufu. So this is the first real chronological link that we can make between the harbor and the reign of this king. So we have his Horus name, we have his cartouche sometime. Here we have probably on this clay ceiling a mention of the pyramid, Akhet Khufu. And the examples that I show you here, the 6 examples, are made with a dark clay originally from the Nile Valley. So it means those ceilings belong to some bags or baskets or box sent from the Nile Valley to the site, open on the site. I don't know what they did with the content. Probably they sent it on the other side. But these 2 examples here are made with a local yellow clay. So it means in these buildings, they open box or basket or bags sent from the Nile Valley, but they probably also seal bags in direction to the Nile Valley. So we are here on the building that probably deal with all the goods that they sent to the Sinai or they brought back from the Sinai. So between the seashore and the gallery area, we have this huge building that we call intermediate building because it's in between. It's 2.5 kilometers from the seashore in the middle of nowhere. But we found here probably the largest building, pharaonic building on the Red Sea. It's 60 meters by 35 meters. And it was completely filled with Aeolian sand. We had to remove more than 3,000 cubic meters of Aeolian sand to finally finish the excavation last season. So it took us only 2 seasons to do that. A lot of sand. And we found beautiful floors, perfectly clean. Nothing, almost nothing on it. So we excavated a huge building and we found just several fireplaces, mostly in this long room, in front, this command room, in front of all the elongated rooms. So a few fireplaces, big storage jars, several tools, no ceiling impression, no ceilings, but with the pottery, we can clearly date this building from exactly the same phase. So this is a component of the harbor installation, no problem. It was extremely well preserved. It's not sensible on this picture, but this wall is actually 2 meters in elevation, and there is almost no demolition in the building. Some of the blocks have been probably reused, but this building was just left like that and slowly filled by sand. You can see here that on the floor we have regular post holes. So all these elongated rooms, there is 12 rooms, were originally covered with a light roof, and you have just on the bottom here one of these complete jars that we found in situ. So a big building, very clean floor. We realized that before they left, they probably closed the door and they probably dismantled the ceiling. So they tried to keep this building functional after they left for the last time. We made a test trench under the floor, and we found another phase of building, which is actually very sensible here, different orientation, small rectangular rooms with a lot of pottery material, no clay ceiling, nothing like that, but the pottery material is actually synchronous to the entire site and to this building also. So we had a very fast succession of installation here. Small installation at the beginning, a very big one at some point, probably 2, 3, 4 phases, probably 2, 3, 4 phases, and expedition also. But all of them are probably from the time of Khufu. This building is very interesting for us because it actually creating the second link with the pyramid construction project in the Nile Valley. Because so far this layout with elongated rooms is only known in the context of expedition and around the pyramid complex. So you have here this example at Et El Gorab, excavated by Mark Lehner, and in fact they are exactly similar, the same proportion. You have those examples of elongated installation rooms on the back of the Khafra pyramid, but the most interesting example is probably this one here. This is a geomagnetic survey recently published by the German Institute. And we are just a few dozens of meters south of the Red Pyramid of King Snofru, so the predecessor of Khufu. And they found exactly the same kind of installation that they interpret as workmen barracks. Mark Lehner is interpreting those installations as probably dorms. So we have huge installation probably used for dwelling part of the expedition, probably the troop, in the case of Wadi al-Jarf, probably the troop that I have to cross to the Red Sea to the Sinai. So we have also several camps. I will not go too much on detail because we did not excavate. This is just a kite view, but this part of the site is still untouched. And finally, we have also, like in Masagawasis, like in Ensarna, we have multiple galleries, but at the site we have 30 galleries, all carved in the rock. We have a group of 17 here and another group here. And you can see that here in the middle there is a blank spot. Well, so since we did this plan, we discovered 2 more galleries in this area. So they used all the space available in order to cut as much galleries as possible. So when we found them, they were completely filled with sediment. And after 8 campaigns, well, the 8th campaign is coming next March and April. So in 7 campaigns, we were able to excavate all those galleries, 1 to 17 on this group. And so we have 2 standards. Generally, most of them are between 16 to 18 meters in length, 3 meters wide, 2 meters high. But we have 2 examples of very long galleries, like this one, G3, more than 34 meters in length. It looks like being in the metro. You know, it's the subway when you're entering this thing without a light. It's really, really impressive. And this is probably not a surprise if this is inside this long gallery that we found the only trace of a possible official report. So this is a small piece of inscription, maybe the size of my hand. All the rest of it have been destroyed probably by the water infiltration. And the name of the guy, Hidu, we have a guy here, Hidu, scribe of the Fayum. It was probably a part of a long procession of officials represented on this inscription originally. We have other installations in those galleries. Those tiny low walls, all the time, we found them. You see, there is one on the back here. And those walls were probably used, in fact, to store and to pile the piece of wood that they use for the boats. We found similar low walls in Ain Sokhna under the boat that I showed you before. And this installation was probably here in order to avoid a direct contact of the piece of the hull, the piece of wood with a contact. We try to avoid a contact with a direct contact with the floor. You know, if there is some water infiltration in the galleries at some point, it will just destroy the wood. And in the case of Wadi al-Jarf, when the expedition went to the Sinai, probably all the members cross the Red Sea. There is no section by land. So the entire success of the expedition is linked to a proper storage of these elements in the galleries. So unfortunately, they took the most of the piece of boats at some point, and we have only small pieces left. Most of the pieces that you have here are made with cedar from Lebanon, so imported wood, extremely precious, expensive wood. So it also justified this necessity of low walls in order to protect them. We found also hundreds, thousands of small pieces, tenons, just elements that prove that the wood has been recarved at some point. We have also some pieces sometimes with inscription on it. So this is a software that we're using D-Stretch in order to push the red color. That's very, very useful. So, and we have box and box of fragments of ropes, and the galleries were also used not only for the wood, they were used also to store big jar containers, like I showed you in Sokhna before. But in this gallery, for example, we found more than 188 complete jars in situ. They've just collapsed because a part of the ceilings collapsed later, but now those deposits were almost completely undisturbed. And we have 2 more galleries with similar deposits on the side of this gallery. It's an ongoing excavation. We know that these storage jars have been produced locally. We excavate so far 4 pottery kilns. We have 3 more to excavate next season. This one here is the largest pottery kiln ever discovered in Egypt. It's more than 3.3 meters, 20 centimeters in length. It's really a massive pottery kiln. It was used for firing or big jars, maybe, but also a small part of the local production are service dishes, small meidum bowls. And as you can see, we found regularly unfired pieces of pottery. This is actually a very typical meidum bowl for the early Fourth Dynasty. We found a potter's wheel, a complete profile here. We found the pit for preparing the clay. So this is a harbor, but there is also, in order to provide all the pottery, there is a full pottery workshop with it. So now, those are the big storage jars. They were inscribed with those red signs before firing. It's something I never seen anything like that before. So when the jar was ready, a scribe passed, he just inscribed those signs, they fired the pots, and the sign turned red, and they were cooked, so included into the clay. So it's most of these inscriptions are really well preserved. So we have generally those 3 inscriptions. This one, remember it, Maouret. But we have also this one, Reru Bikwinebu, which is in fact built on the golden horse name of King Khufu. So just in case we don't know, it's written on it. This production is clearly in the tradition of the early Fourth Dynasty, and the presence of the golden horse name on the jars before firing is just showing us that this production is strictly contemporaneous to the reign of Khufu. We have many other inscriptions on the blocks here that they use in order to close the entrance of the galleries. So this red mark is also built on one of the names of Khufu. So that's another example of the D-Stretch software that we use for reading better the inscription. And so now I will go on detail on the closure system of the galleries. So on this group of 4 galleries here, G8, 9, 10, 11, you can see that the blocks in blue were probably put at the entrance of the galleries at the very beginning. So they came, they carved the galleries, they put these blocks, blue blocks, on the side of it, creating a sort of pathway here leading to the gallery. And then each time they leave the site, they push those blocks, the red blocks, at the entrance in order to close the entrance of the gallery. So a very heavy, massive closure system at the entrance in order to make sure that the wooden pieces will be well preserved inside. So after the last occupation and the last closure of the site, some people came and take out the wooden pieces, but they never tried to move the blocks out. They just cut the ceiling like looters. They just cut the ceiling of the galleries. They took the piece of boats, they reshaped and recarved them, and they left the site with it. So we have the entire closure system at the entrance in the gallery perfectly in situ, completely untouched since the final closure of the site. And in the space between the blocks, they put all those tiny pebbles, blocks, and they trash a lot of things. And because we archaeologists love the trash, we found a lot of objects, a lot of elements from the daily life at the site. So they trash many pieces of boats, like this big piece one. This is 1 meter, so it's the largest piece we found so far, also in cedar from Lebanon. But all these tools from the everyday life, even complete copper tools. We found this mallet. I've seen exactly the same one at the MFA this morning. We found complete object, just trash here. They can bring them back to the valley, they can reuse it. No, they just trash. It's really the final closure of the site. And you can see that we have tons of piece of linen, and regularly there is inscription on it. So you see there is inscription on almost everything, on the copper chisel. We have seen one on the wooden pieces before, here on textile, so everything is inscribed. But the most interesting discovery came in 2013 in this area, in the portcullis system of the Gallery J1, when we found a set of papyrus, a huge quantity of papyrus. There is probably 800 pieces so far. Those are the oldest inscribed papyri ever discovered in Egypt. And you will see that it was extremely exciting because a third of these papyrus are not talking about anything in connection with the Wadi al-Jarf, but they are in connection with the construction of the Great Pyramid at Giza. So another clear evidence for connection with Khufu. So we never expect this discovery. And believe me or not, we found this one the 1st of April, so it was not a joke. And we never expect such a discovery, it was really tense for Pierre because we got the main part of the deposit 2 weeks before the end of the season. So it was a real glass plate factory. We have to send every 2 days or foreman in the near town in order to buy this piece of glass that we use in order to protect the piece of papyrus. So we have 2 categories of documents. I will go very fast on the account, which is about 2/3 of the documents in general. This is probably one of the oldest Excel worksheet. It's working exactly in the same way. I'm not an Egyptologist, I'm an archaeologist, so the first time I saw this piece, I said, oh, well, it's an Excel worksheet. So this one is quite iconic. It was published all around because it's actually giving us a year. And this is a perfect terminus post quem. So it means they close the galleries and they trash or deposit the papyrus when they at the very end of the occupation. And the date that we have here is corresponding more or less to the end of the reign of Khufu. So far, this is the last year we know for his reign. There is apparently another inscription that shows up on the closing system of the second boat at Giza very recently, mentioning a year, a 14th census. But for us, we have the year after the 30th census of the large and small cattle, which means we are on the year 27. The census was done every 2 years. So 13, 26 years, the year after, we are probably year 27 of the reign of Khufu, and you have his Horus name actually here. But so this is an account. You have here daily entries and a list of goods. But more interesting for us here, you have the name of the team for which those goods were delivered. And if you remember those small signs, that's exactly the same that we have on the jars. So on the papyrus, we have the name of the team that we have also on the jars, written before firing, but sometimes this is on dipinti. And this is probably the name of the team or one of the team that was involved into the expedition or the final closure expedition of the site at Wadi al-Jarf. That's one of the best preserved piece. This is an account of bread. It's more than 86 centimeters in length. And when I told you it's working like an Excel sheet, you can see here the sum of delivery, the different kind of cereals. And here they just record what deliveries were scheduled, what was delivered, and what is pending. And this is quite interesting also because we have here the provenance of the goods. This is the Harpoon Nome, which is a nome region, an administrative area in the eastern delta, so really north of Egypt. So apparently, these nomes provide the food for this team that works in Giza area, and that team was also sent at Wadi al-Jarf at some time. So it looks like the goods are coming from almost everywhere in Egypt. But in those documents, we have this Harpoon Nome. We have also another provenance. So it's actually quite interesting. But 1/3 of those papyrus are much fascinating because they are a diary. They are an account of time of a team that actually records several activities that they had done in the Nile Valley, near the Giza area. So nothing in connection with the Wadi al-Jarf itself. So I will be very short, unfortunately, on that, but most of these papyri have been published already by my colleague Pierre Tallet, and papyrus A and B. There is much more coming. So those are the best part preserved. So we have these three big pieces here, papyrus A and B. And this is a count of the time. So the team of someone in charge, Inspector Marouard, his team record on a daily basis all the activities they have done in a day. So on such a document, you have here the months of activity. Here, this is the first month of Achet. That's the beginning of the year. Every 20 columns here, you have a red line. It's because the account of time work in decade, and for each day, there is 2 columns. So here, you will have 2 columns for the day. Here, it's day 9. And for each day, they will record what they did. And this is mostly, today we done this work at this place, we sleep at that place. And every day, for several weeks and several months. So I will go fast because the time is running. But the most exciting part, probably in papyrus B, is actually the work they done was transporting blocks from the Tura quarries to the construction site of the Great Pyramid at Giza. So you see here, the 26, Inspector Marouard sailed with his file. So the file is actually his team. It's about 40 people, probably. So he sailed with his file from Tura's house, loaded with stones, for the Achet Khufu. Achet Khufu is the name of the Great Pyramid. Spending the night at Khufu, we'll have a closer look on that later, the mouth of the lake of Khufu. Day 27, Inspector Marouard sailed with his fire from the Khufu, navigation down the river north to the horizon of Khufu, loaded with stones. Day 28, Inspector Marouard sailed with his file from the horizon of Khufu. In the morning, navigation upstream to Tura's house. Day 29, Inspector Marouard spent the day with this file, collect the stones at Tura. It's extremely repetitive. We consider that for each decade, every 10 days, it did this round trip from the Tura quarries to the construction site, probably 2 or 3 times. So he's turning. Basically, he's doing that. He's living, this is mostly, well, I'm going too much in detail here, I will lose my, so every 10 days, they change. That's a rotation. So for 10 days, they will collect the stones at Tura North. They will go to the site here at Khufu, and it will take them 2 days round trip. So they took the blocks, put the blocks on the boat, move 1 day, unload the blocks, go back. So 2 days for a round trip. 10 days after, they're changing, they will work from Tura's house, and they will go to Khufu, which is close to Khufu. We'll see that on the map after. And it's taking 3 days, so it's a little bit longer. But they're doing that regularly according to Pierre evaluation, for about 3 months, probably 4 months. We have only pieces of the papyrus. And all these activities have been done during the Nile flood. So the level of the Nile is high enough. They load the blocks, transport the blocks to the construction site, and they're doing that intensively. A little detail, one of these papyrus is actually mentioning a quite important personage, the half-brother of Khufu. So you can see here on day 24 of the papyrus B4, Inspector Marouard and his field collect stones with the subordinate of the palace. the upper team of the noble al-Jarf, director of the Rache-Rufu. So at some point, they work for this guy, and if you have been to the MFA, this is one of the masterpieces of the museum. So we have here an historical record of a really high-rank personage, half-brother of Rufu. And this person is mentioned as the director of the Rache-Rufu, but he was probably in charge of the construction of all the king and probably in charge of the construction of the pyramid, at least at the end of the reign of Rufu. We have multiple toponyms also recorded in this papyrus, like here the chapels of Rufu with a triple determinative of the chapel. And those documents made possible to reconstruct some elements of the topography of the pyramid complex at Giza. And here you can see the 3D reconstruction made by Mark Lehner. And we think that several of the toponyms recorded on the papyrus are actually matching with those installations. Particularly here, the Rache-Rufu, which is the mouth of the lake, probably the entrance and access to here, a lake. So we can imagine that Marouard and his team came from North Tuha and just arrived this area on one day, and after they unload the stones here. We have another toponym here, Shehufu, which is in connection with South Tuha, and this is probably linked to a part of the basin, naturally in the area of the Rufu Valley Temple, probably closest to the Sphinx area. So for the moment, Pierre only published this part of the documents. We have other fragments. Papyrus C is actually mentioning something else, probably the construction of an outboard installation in the Nile Delta. So at that time of the year, November, December, the Nile flood is down, so the team of Marouard was sent somewhere else for doing other activities. Papyrus D and E probably are in connection also with some maintenance activity in the Nile Valley. And for the season of April, May, and June, we have only very tiny pieces. The study is still in progress. You know, Pierre is really working with a puzzle. It's only tiny pieces. But just to give you an idea, when you put the things together, you found something that might be exciting. So all this is still the same set of documents. And you can see that here, for about 7 days, the team of Marouard is sailing in one direction. And after sailing, for probably 3 to 4 days, we start walking. So it's probably a real extrapolation for the moment, but it might be possible that this section of the papyrus is recording the trip from the team of Marouard from Giza. We know that they are living from the second nome of Lower Egypt. It's recording in the document. And they probably go south, sail for 7 days, and start to record the trail they did in the Nile Valley. So it might be too early, but it's possible that this document starts to record the work of the team of Marouard on the way to the Wadi Jarf. And according to Pierre, several pieces of the papyrus are already mentioning some activities probably done at the site of Wadi Jarf or in the Sinai. So these documents were probably a full year of recording. We preserved just a good part at the beginning, but more is certainly coming. So I will finish here because I probably completely exposed the timing. But this is just a map that summarized the information that we finally got after 15, about 20 years of work in the Red Sea now. We know that the first harbor, the prototype, is definitely at Wadi Jarf. They built a huge complex, probably too huge, with multiple galleries that they never completely used, huge buildings that they left almost clean. And at the end of the reign of Khufu, the site was completely closed and never reused. But if you remember the clay ceilings I mentioned in Ensokhna, about 15, 20 years after the closure of the Wadi Jarf, Khafra started to set and to install a new harbor installation here at Ensokhna. And this one will be functional for the next 800 years. In both cases, they're reaching the same area. In both cases, they probably stop at the Tel Hasboudran Al-Marka fortress. But this location of Ensokhna was much more interesting for the king that actually built the complex in Giza. Moving from Giza through the Wadi Araba to the Wadi Jarf was too long. You had at least 10 to 12 days to cross the desert, plus at least 7 days on the Nile. So it was too far, too distant. Even if they built a perfect harbor, you can imagine for Wadi Jarf was probably not so convenient. And they finally decided to set the harbor for quite a long time in Ensokhna because the distance to Memphis, to the capital, and to Giza was shorter. And they are not afraid to make 2 or 3 times a longer trip on the Red Sea. At that point, navigation is probably perfectly under control. So this is more or less the evolution of the harbor that we can build for this area of the Gulf of Suez. So I stop here. Thank you so much.